Alma Angeles, welcome to Eagle News International. Good evening to you, CJ.
Good evening, Alma, and here are tonight's headlines.
Davao City Mayor Sara Duterte Carpio will be the running mate of presidential aspirant and former Senator Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos in the 2022 national elections.
Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte on Friday announced Western Europe's first partial lockdown of the winter, with at least 3 weeks of COVID curbs on restaurants, shops, and sporting events.
Russian President Vladimir Putin said in an interview aired today that Moscow had nothing to do with the migrant crisis on the Belarus-Poland border.
Nations were trying to rebuild bridges at the COP26 summit on Saturday after talks faltered overnight when rich emitters refused a request to help developing economies meet mounting financial losses from climate change.
First in our news, Davao City Mayor Sara Duterte Carpio on Saturday, November 13, filed her certificate of candidacy for vice president under Lakas CMD. Now, this was after the previous Lakas CMD vice presidential bet, Lyle Uy, withdrew his certificate of candidacy for the 2022 national elections. Lawyer Reynold Munsayak filed the COC on behalf of the Davao City Mayor on Saturday with the Commission on Elections. Immediately after the filing of Sara Duterte's COC as vice presidential candidate of Lakas CMD, the Executive Committee of the Partido Federal ng Pilipinas or PFP of Presidential Bet, Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. issued a resolution adopting her as the party's candidate for vice president and endorsed her as Marcos Jr.'s running mate. The PFP resolution noted that the party has not previously issued any certificate of nomination and acceptance for any vice presidential and senatorial candidates for the May 2022 elections. Sara's decision to run for vice president leaves Marcos Jr. in a strong position for the presidency. Popularly known as Bongbong, Marcos Jr. has been in the second spot in voter surveys ahead of celebrity Mayor Francisco Domagoso, boxing great Manny Pacquiao, and incumbent Vice President Leni Robredo. There was speculation Sara had sought to persuade Marcos Jr. to slide back into the vice presidential race and create a formidable alliance between the two clans.
The COVID-19 reproduction number or rate of transmission in the National Capital Region has slightly increased from 0.37 to 0.44 on November 12. Data from Okta Research Group showed. The group said there was also an increase in the region's 7-day moving average from 364 cases between November 3 and 9 to 423 cases between November 5 and 11. Okta's Professor Guido David said there is no clear indication yet whether cases have plateaued or whether there have been changes in the current downward trend. A continuous decline in the number of cases is also expected. Data from the Department of Health showed that Metro Manila's remains under the low-risk category with 3.37 average daily attack rate and negative 2-week growth rate.
Meanwhile, on-site and transport workers are now required to get vaccinated against COVID-19. Malacanang announced this Friday. This developed after the Interagency Task Force for the Management of Emerging Infectious Diseases, or IATF, approved several measures to ramp up the national COVID-19 vaccination drive, according to presidential spokesperson Harry Roque in a press statement. But here he is. Let's listen in.
Bilang pagsunod po sa direktiba ng Presidente at para tumaas ang demand ng COVID-19 vaccination, inaprubahan po ng inyong IATF ang mga sumusunod na measures na mag-take effect simula 1 po ng Disyembre ng taong ito. Kabilang dito ang pag-require ng mga establishmento at employers sa public at private sector sa mga lugar na may sapat na supply ng COVID-19 vaccine na magpapabakuna ng kanilang eligible employees na nasa on-site work. Sa mga eligible employees na hindi bakunado, maaaring hindi sila matanggal sa trabaho dahil lamang sa rason na hindi sila bakunado. Pero kinakailangan nilang mag-undergo ng regular RT-PCR testing or antigen test at their own expense. Kailangan fully vaccinated din ang eligible workers na nasa pampublikong transportasyon para magpatuloy ang kanilang operasyon. Maaari namang tanggihan ng public and private establishments ang pagpasok o pagbibigay serbisyo sa mga nananatiling hindi bakunado o sa mga partially vaccinated kahit na sila ay eligible naman for vaccination. Hindi kasama rito ang mga frontline at emergency services na tuloy-tuloy ang assistance sa lahat regardless of vaccination status. Para lalo pang mapataas ang pagbabakuna, hinihikayat ang mga lokal na pamahalaan na maglabas ng mga kautusan o mga ordinansa na nagbibigay incentives para sa fully vaccinated individuals. Para naman sa business establishments, maaari silang mag-require ng proof of vaccination bago payagan ang mag-individual or entities na mag-undertake or mag-qualify sa ilang activities. Isa pang measure ay hindi pagmarka ng absent sa lahat ng workers na mababakunahan sa oras ng trabaho basta magpakita lamang ng proof ng confirmed vaccination schedule. Kaugnay ng lahat na ito, tanging medical clearance na galing sa Government Health Office o birth certificate ang magsisilbing sufficient at valid proof of ineligibility for vaccination. Hinihikayat din ang mga ahensya ng pamahalaan na magpapatupad ng mga measures na nagbibigay prioridad sa fully vaccinated individuals availing of government programs and services.
The IATF's approval of several measures to further step up the immunization campaign against COVID-19 came as the government intends to hold the 3-day vaccination program dubbed Bayanihan Bakunahan Day from November 29 to December 1st. The government is targeting to inoculate at least 15 million Filipinos during the 3-day national vaccination drive.
Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte on Friday announced Western Europe's first partial lockdown of the winter, with at least 3 weeks of COVID curbs on restaurants, shops, and sporting events. Take a look.
Met een harde klap van een paar weken en heel breed. Want dat virus zit overal. Door het hele land, in alle sectoren en onder alle leeftijden.
Bars, restaurants, cafes, and supermarkets will have to shut at 8 p.m. for the next 3 weeks from Saturday, while non-essential shops must shut at 6 p.m., according to the Dutch government. People will be limited to having 4 visitors at home and have been advised to work at home unless absolutely necessary. Public events will be scrapped while football matches, including the Netherlands' home World Cup qualifier with Norway next week, must be played behind closed doors. Schools will, however, remain open and people will be allowed to leave their homes without restrictions. Police fired water cannon against hundreds of firework-throwing protesters in The Hague after Rutte unveiled the annoying and far-reaching measures to curb a record spike in coronavirus infections. The government will review the situation on December 3 to see if further measures are needed. Cases have soared since the Dutch government proposed COVID measures less than 2 months ago on September 25, reaching a record level of more than 16,000 on Thursday and Friday.
Meanwhile, the head of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, WHO Director General, said COVID-19 is surging in countries with lower vaccination rates in Eastern Europe, but also in countries with some of the world's highest vaccination rates in Western Europe. Take a look.
Almost 2 million cases of COVID-19 were reported in Europe last week, the most in a single week in that region since the pandemic started. Almost 27,000 deaths were reported from Europe, more than half of all COVID-19 deaths globally last week. COVID-19 is surging in countries with lower vaccination rates in Eastern Europe, but also in countries with some of the world's highest vaccination rates in Western Europe. It's another reminder, as we have said again and again, that vaccines do not replace the need for other precautions. Vaccines reduce the risk of hospitalization, severe disease, and death, but they do not fully prevent transmission. No country can simply vaccinate its way out of the pandemic. It's not vaccines or, it's vaccines and. And it's not just about how many people are vaccinated, it's about who is vaccinated. It makes no sense to give boosters to healthy adults or to vaccinate children when the health workers or older people and other high-risk groups around the world are still waiting for their first dose. The exception, as we have said, is immunocompromised individuals. Countries with the highest vaccine coverage continue to stockpile more vaccines, while low-income countries continue to wait. Every day, there are 6 times more boosters administered globally than primary doses in low-income countries. This is a scandal that must stop now.
Excellent data coming out of European countries and particularly out of the United Kingdom. And I think the recent estimates at the beginning of the month was that a vaccinated person, an unvaccinated person, has a 32 times greater risk of dying in this pandemic than a vaccinated person. That's very good odds if you just want to look at that in terms of something that enhances your chance of life. So, make that decision if you can. Go out and get the vaccine. Because
The WHO has set a goal of fully vaccinating 40% of the population of every country in the world by the end of this year.
British Health Secretary Sajid Javid tells the UK Parliament that all NHS England staff will be required to have the COVID-19 vaccine by spring 2022. An estimated 80,000 to 100,000 staff who are currently working within the NHS have not been vaccinated. We have Kathleen Eusebio reporting.
Vaccinated should be.
Here is an update in the United Kingdom. All frontline workers in the National Health Service in England will need to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19 from April 1 or lose their jobs, Health Minister Sajid Javid said on Tuesday. The government had already announced that all care home workers will need to have had both jabs from November 11, but was waiting on the findings of a consultation before extending it to all NHS frontline staff.
There will be 2 key exemptions. One for those who don't have face-to-face contact with patients, and the second for those that are medically exempt. These requirements will apply across health and wider social care settings that are regulated by the Care Quality Commission. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this decision doesn't mean that I don't recognise concerns about workforce pressures this winter and indeed beyond. As a result of some people perhaps choosing to leave their job because of the decision that we've taken. Of course, I recognise that. It's with this in mind that we've chosen for the condition not to come into force until 12 weeks after parliamentary approval, that no one in the NHS or care that is currently unvaccinated should be scapegoated, singled out, or shamed. That would be totally unacceptable. This is about supporting them to make a positive choice, to protect vulnerable people, to protect their colleagues, and of course, to protect themselves.
The move comes at a time when the publicly funded health service is already facing a huge waiting list due to a dramatic reduction in appointments during the pandemic. The NHS, which is funded from general taxation and national insurance contributions, is Europe's biggest employer and one of the biggest in the world, with some 1.3 million staff. Javid stated around 90% of NHS staff have received at least 2 doses of the COVID-19 vaccine, although the figure is closer to 80% in some areas. This means there are up to 100,000 NHS workers in England who are unvaccinated, raising fears about how the service will cope if they lose their jobs. According to Labour's health spokesman Jonathan Ashworth, the NHS is under the most intense pressure this winter already, and the waiting list are at close to 6 million. Nursing union officer Stuart Tuckwood, meanwhile, warned that adopting this compulsory approach could actually demoralize staff and could force them to leave the health service at a time when they're very much struggling with staffing members.
But we don't think that compelling staff to have it and adopting this mandatory vaccination policy is the right approach. We still think that there's work to be done in terms of having conversations with people who've not had the vaccine yet, making sure we understand their reasons for doing so, making sure that it's fully accessible to them to do that. And we're very worried that adopting this compulsory approach could actually demoralize staff, could force them to leave the health service at a time when we're very, very much struggling with staffing numbers in the NHS. And so we'd like to see the government take a different approach. So we're quite frustrated by the announcement today. The NHS is really constantly on a knife edge at the moment in terms of staffing levels. Very, very much struggled during the pandemic and before that because of 11 years of underfunding and austerity. And it really doesn't take much to push the health service into crisis at the moment. And it really, what we're seeing from the adoption of this policy in the care sector is that it has led to worsening staff shortages. And so we're very anxious to make sure that that doesn't happen in the health service as well. So we do have some time before this policy is potentially implemented. So we want to see the government make sure that all resources are put towards talking to people, having conversations, supporting them to make sure that we can try and persuade as many of those people to have their vaccines as possible.
Ministers have so far resisted calls to impose general vaccine requirements in enclosed public spaces, and although daily case levels have fallen over recent days, the 7-day average is still nearly 37,500. Health policy is controlled by the devolved administrations in Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. Scotland and Wales have already indicated they have no plans to make jabs compulsory for healthcare workers. Northern Ireland is consulting on the issue. Reporting from London, United Kingdom, I'm Kathleen Eusebio. We live in interesting times.
Meanwhile, Japan has eased border rules to allow business travelers and students in. Here's Dennis Liu for the report.
Japan said it will allow short-term business travelers, foreign students, and other visa holders to enter the country, but tourists are still barred under pandemic border restrictions. From Monday, business visitors fully inoculated with an authorized vaccine will need to quarantine for only 3 days, down from a minimum of 10 days. The Foreign Ministry said, according to Japanese media, around 370,000 visa holders are waiting to enter the country and will be gradually let in. Business travelers remain the responsibility of their firms while in Japan and need to provide activity plans for each trip, the Foreign Ministry said. Visitors from 3 countries deemed high risk, Trinidad and Tobago, Peru, and Venezuela, are still barred. The ministry did not say when tourists may be allowed in. Japan welcomed a record 31.9 million foreign visitors in 2019 and had been on track to achieve its goal of 40 million in 2020 before the pandemic hit. Daily cases in this country of 126 million have plunged from record highs of more than 25,000 in August to the current average of just over 200. Despite a slow start to its vaccination campaign, 73% of the population is now fully inoculated. Japan has seen comparatively few virus deaths, around 18,000, despite never having imposed stay-at-home orders. This is the latest for now. Reporting from Tokyo, Japan, this is Dennis Liu. We live in interesting times.
Thousands of third-dose COVID vaccination appointments were booked on the first day they were available for the 5 City of Toronto-run immunization clinics. Here's Cherry Recolizado for the report.
The third dose of COVID vaccine has come to the City of Toronto. After the Ontario Ministry of Health gave its green light to administer the third dose of the COVID vaccine, Toronto Public Health has opened vaccine clinics and has begun appointments online. Those who are eligible are the following members of the community: healthcare workers, essential caregivers, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis individuals, those who are 70 years old and above, and those who received 2 doses of AstraZeneca or Covishield vaccine. The city encourages these individuals to book and get their third dose if it's been 6 months since their last vaccine dose. As of this week, more than 8,000 third dose COVID vaccine appointments have been made. Toronto has opened 5 major immunization clinics, and they are at Cloverdale Mall, Metro Toronto Convention Centre, Mitchell Field Arena, Scarborough Town Centre, and Woodbine Mall. Toronto has also introduced the Super Supportive Vaccine Clinics this week. These clinics will support particularly those who have a fear of needles, those who may need a quiet space to get vaccinated, or those who may need an ASL interpreter. As of November 9, the City of Toronto has reported 58 new cases of COVID-19, 4 are hospitalized, and 3 new deaths. About 2.3 million people in the City of Toronto are fully vaccinated. In Toronto, Cherry Recolisado, Eagle News. We live in interesting times.
Thanks, Cherry. The World Health Organization said it had restarted a process that could grant emergency authorization for the Russian-made Sputnik V vaccine against COVID-19 after several months in limbo. Take a look.
So the process has restarted. We are in conversations with the applicant, with the Russian government, the different parts of the Russian government, and we are expecting to have a meeting next week to receive the full. We still have to receive the full dossier from the Sputnik. There are pending issues regarding inspections to Gamaleya, inspections to the manufacturers, and there's a
WHO emergency use authorization would be a seal of quality for the Russian shot, as well as making wider recognition more likely and possibly freeing up travel for those vaccinated with it. It could also open the way to Sputnik V being used by the COVAX initiative that aims to get vaccines to the poorest countries. Neither U.S. nor EU medicines watchdogs have so far granted authorizations for Sputnik V, which has been used in Russia and some other countries since late 2020. So far, the WHO has granted emergency authorizations to COVID shots from India's Bharat Biotech, Pfizer BioNTech, Moderna, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, and Sinopharm.
In other news, Pacific Rim leaders agreed to cut tariffs on COVID-19 vaccines at a virtual summit Saturday, according to New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern in a press conference. The annual Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit brought together leaders from 21 member economies, including U.S. President Joe Biden and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping, in a bid to chart a path to pandemic recovery. New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said the group discussed an economic reset in the wake of the coronavirus crisis. Take a look.
Congratulations on a successful host year.
Just concluded the APEC economic leaders meeting. It is clear that APEC leaders are determined to work together to defeat COVID-19. We are focused on driving a coordinated economic response to the biggest downturn in 75 years, creating new models of economic growth that work for all and responding to climate change. Firstly, we put APEC back on a stronger footing. As we recover from this crisis, we have the opportunity to reset. That is why leaders decided to set out a plan for APEC's work through until 2040. Secondly, this year, APEC has demonstrated that trade is a force for good. APEC has rejected vaccine nationalism and lowered tariffs on vaccines. We've got vaccines moving across borders more quickly, and no APEC economy has introduced export restrictions on vaccines since trade ministers met in June. Thirdly, APEC has made progress on climate change and sustainability. Particularly, we have agreed a plan to halt an increase in fossil fuel subsidy use, which already costs the world hundreds of billions of dollars a year. Well, of course, as APEC economies, we would welcome the ongoing bilateral dialogue between APEC members, of course. And as I welcome some of the more recent resolutions that we've seen from COP26 in that regard between the United States and China.
And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba. Sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. May lalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Welcome back to the news. Russian President Vladimir Putin said in an interview aired Saturday that Moscow had nothing to do with the migrant crisis on the Belarus-Poland border. Take a look.
Хочу, чтобы все знали, мы-то здесь совершенно ни при чем. Так вот на нас все пытаются по любому поводу и вообще без всякого повода какую-то ответственность возложить. Ни наши авиационные компании не возят этих людей. Вообще ни одна наша компания не возит.
Putin said European leaders needed to talk to Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko if they want to resolve this crisis, which has left hundreds of migrants, mainly from the Middle East, trapped on the border. He again blamed the West for the crisis, saying its policies in the Middle East were the reasons migrants wanted to go to Europe in the first place. The West accuses Belarusian strongman Alexander Lukashenko of luring thousands of migrants from the Middle East to his country to send across the border into the EU in revenge for sanctions. Polish border guards put the number of migrants on the border at between 3,000 and 4,000, with more arriving every day. The migrants, mainly Kurds from the Middle East, have been stuck for days on the border in near freezing temperatures.
Russian President Vladimir Putin said in an interview aired Saturday that Moscow considered recent Black Sea exercises by the U.S. and other NATO ships as a serious challenge. Take a look.
Вот действительно сейчас Соединенные Штаты, их союзники по НАТО проводят незапланированные, вот я хочу это подчеркнуть, незапланированные учения в акватории Черного моря. Причем не просто сформирована достаточно мощная корабельная группировка, но используется в ходе этих учений и авиация, в том числе и стратегическая авиация. Используется Б-51, это достаточно уже старенькие самолеты, но дело не в носителях, а дело в том, что у них на борту боевое стратегическое оружие. Это серьезный вызов для нас.
His comments came after Washington this week raised alarms over Russian military activities close to Ukraine's border. President Putin said that his defense ministry had a proposal to hold its own unplanned exercises in the same waters. President Putin seemed to refer to several U.S. warships taking part in exercises in the Black Sea, which Moscow this week said it was monitoring. On Wednesday, U.S. top diplomat Antony Blinken warned Moscow against making another serious mistake on Ukraine as Washington sought clarity about troop movements near the border. The EU on Friday said it was also concerned by Russian military activities close to Ukraine's border. The accusations come amid rising tensions between the EU and Moscow over a migrant standoff on the border between Poland and Kremlin-allied Belarus.
Former U.S. President Donald Trump's longtime advisor, Steve Bannon, was indicted Friday for refusing to testify to the congressional committee investigating the Capitol riot, according to the Justice Department.
Select Committee is meeting this evening to consider a report on a resolution recommending that the House of Representatives find Stephen K. Bannon in contempt of Congress for refusal to comply with a subpoena duly issued by the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. As chair of this committee, I won't allow further harm to the rule of law in the course of our work. Mr. Bannon will comply with our investigation or he will face the consequences.
Preserving our Constitution and the rule of law is a central purpose of this investigation. The plain fact here is that Mr. Bannon has no legal right to ignore the committee's lawful subpoena.
Federal grand jury returned the indictment in a significant victory for the House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack, which is battling efforts by Trump and top aides to use presidential privilege to block testimony and documents necessary for the probe. The indictment came hours after Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, declined to show up for a committee deposition after being subpoenaed, which could lead to similar charges of contempt. Investigators think Meadows and Bannon could have information on links between the White House and the Trump supporters who invaded the Capitol to prevent the certification of Joe Biden as winner of the November 2020 presidential election. Bannon, 67 years old, was charged with 2 counts of contempt for ignoring subpoenas to appear for a deposition and for failing to supply documents to the committee. Each count carries a penalty of 1 month to 1 year in jail.
U.S. President Joe Biden will hold a hotly anticipated virtual summit with his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping, according to White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki. Let's listen in.
On Monday evening, the president will meet virtually with President Xi Jinping of the People's Republic of China. The two leaders will discuss ways to responsibly manage the competition between the United States and the PRC, as well as ways to work together where our interests align. Kind of what our strategy has been to date. I mean, this meeting is coming after 10 months of President Biden taking action so we can outcompete China in the long term. And that means investing in ourselves at home to strengthen our own competitive hand. It means working with our partners partners and allies to make sure we have a united approach and a coordinated approach as it relates to engagement with China and work together. So I would see this, Andrea, as more of a continuation of that intensive diplomacy, given that we believe intense competition requires that. And I wouldn't see this as I wouldn't set the expectation, I should say, that this is intended to have, major deliverables or outcomes.
And does he plan to bring up the COVID-19 origins with President Xi, given he has said that China has been blocking investigators from getting access to information that's critical to that?
That is a remaining concern, and there will be a broad range of topics that will be discussed, and the president's certainly not going to hold back on areas where he has concern.
Now, relations between the world's two largest economies have recently deteriorated, in particular over Taiwan, a self-ruling democracy claimed by China, which last month made a record number of air incursions near the island. Washington has repeatedly signaled its support for Taiwan in the face of Chinese aggression, but the U.S. and China reached a surprise agreement on climate at a summit in Glasgow.
Sleep-deprived COP26 negotiators struggled to bridge deep divisions, holding up an ambitious deal to deliver the emissions cuts needed to avert the accelerating disaster of climate change. A new draft text released by the Glasgow Summit's UK presidency urged the nations to accelerate efforts to phase out of unfiltered coal and inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. Large emitters such as China, Saudi Arabia, and Russia had tried to remove the mention of polluting fuels, according to delegates. But after resistance from the United States and the European Union, the draft text omitted any reference to a specific finance facility for loss and damage, the mounting cost of global warming so far, which has been a key demand of poorer nations. It noted with deep regret that wealthy nations had also failed to stump up a separate annual sum of $100 billion they promised over a decade ago, but said only that it would come by 2023. Delegates from some 200 countries are in Glasgow to try to hammer out how to implement the 2015 Paris Agreement goals to limit temperature rises to 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius.
Now, dense fog was seen in Moscow with major airports forcing the delay or cancellation of flights. Here's Sammy Coloma for the report.
Moscow, Russia. Tuesday morning here in Moscow is unusual than days gone by, because Tuesday the whole city was wrapped in thick fog that you used to see in the distance. Now can hardly see the cars on the road, and that is the equivalent of the distance will reach 200 meters. So the city kept the street lights on. It is not uncommon for most of the eyewitnesses to take photos and videos out of mixed emotion with excitement and wonder. According to other news, the flight schedules have been delayed today and others have canceled the schedule. Let's take a look at the various photos and videos of the witnesses.
Torrential rain has left a family stranded in the Australian outback, with authorities warning the rescue could take days. Now, the family of 2 adults and 2 children was traveling through the remote Simpson Desert in the center of Australia when their camper van became bogged down on Friday. Responding to an emergency beacon, the Australian Maritime Safety Authorities had to airdrop a satellite phone to communicate with the family due to flooding and the isolation of the area, about 150 kilometers northwest of the small town of Udnadata. Police told national broadcaster ABC that although conditions were easing, overflowing rivers meant the family might be stuck until at least Monday. Severe storms have swept through Australia recently, with the desert town of Alice Springs receiving its highest daily rainfall since 2001 earlier this week, turning the usually dusty Todd River into a swelling stream.
Ethiopia's conflict-torn Tigray region is under effective blockade, according to the World Health Organization, warning that people were starving to death and dying from lack of access to medicines. Take a look.
People are dying because of lack of supplies. We cannot send supplies and medicine to Tigray because it's under blockade. And the blockade is systematic. So no medicine, people are dying, no food, people are starving, no telecommunication, they're isolated from the rest of the world.
And we are struggling to even maintain the most minimum of services right now on the ground. And the risks are growing, people are dying, people are starving. People are dying because of lack of access to the very basics of medical care. The very basic human right to life is now being lost. And it's an unfolding tragedy, and it's unfolding before our very eyes. And the world needs to wake up to what's happening.
Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's government has been locked in a year-long war with the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or TPLF, which has pushed south in recent months and has not rolled out a possible march on the capital, Addis Ababa. The TPLF is demanding an end to what the UN describes as a de facto humanitarian blockade on Tigray, where hundreds of thousands of people are believed to be living in famine-like conditions.
We'll be back with more stories. Please don't go away.
Welcome back. The first ever Papua New Guinea Contemporary Arts Exhibition event kicked off and was attended by the Diplomatic Corps, department and corporate heads, dignitaries, and art lovers. Eco Hartalesa Quinola is at the scene.
The Papua New Guinea Contemporary Arts Exhibition is now open to the public. I am here at the scene in APEC Building, Port Moresby, to show you their artwork, art displays, and body art shows. Let's take a look. the first ever Papua New Guinea Contemporary Arts Exhibition 2021, which was hosted by the National Cultural Commission or NCC with its partner, the Tumbuna Visual Arts Association. It was conducted at the APEC House, Port Moresby with the theme, Take Back Papua New Guinea Through Culture and Creative Industry. The event was attended by the Diplomatic Corps, department and corporate heads, dignitaries, and art lovers. National Cultural Commission's Executive Director, Honorable Stephen Kilanda, said that NCC is committed in developing and promoting arts and creative industry, but Kilanda cannot make it alone. He needs the help and support from the public and private sectors. He believes that culture and arts are vital platforms to build links between people and beyond borders. It will be an engine for economic and social development and will be a path for economic growth.
So this is the first one that the National Cultural Commission has taken initiative and partner with the Tumbuna Visual Arts, a group of artists. We will host. We've got 4 regions: Momase, New Guinea Islands, Island region, and Southern region. So we'll have to put up 4 exhibitions. So we'll have to bring the best ones into Port Moresby, and we'll put up one at the end of the year. That's the biggest one. Local, good, very talented artists around the country, so we are not identifying them, and we'll have to discover their skills.
Minister of Tourism, Arts and Culture, Honorable E.C. Henry Leonard, was pleased that the 3 agencies, namely Arts, Tourism, and Culture, are working towards achieving visions through well-initiated cultural programs and activities. In addition to this, he also reiterated the importance of vaccination rollout in promoting tourism. This will attract inbound tourists to have more resources and budget for cultural events, especially that he is highlighting cultural festivals and domestic tourism.
Since day one, I've been advocating and elevating the status of the ministry. The first thing that I did was to promote cultural festivals in the country. But regardless of the COVID-19, we are still working in promoting our festivals and our events like this to promote tourism. So in my time as the minister, I tried to promote what we call domestic tourism. Even the fact that there won't be any more inbound tourists until we have established our what we call COVID-19 protocols, especially the vaccination. This is one of the last frontiers where culture is still vibrant, where people still practice and live in the traditional cultural ways.
The guests and visitors were amazed and inspired by the array of intricate paintings and designs of these talented and blossoming artists of Papua New Guinea.
Well, usually we used to go to the craft market every Saturday, and this is the first time, as Stephen was saying, that we have the opportunity to sit in these good settings, and this is absolutely amazing. And this will help for sure the artists. Thank you.
Reporting from this world-class and iconic designed APEC building, Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea, this is Echo Hartaleza Quinola, Eagle News. We live in interesting times.
Finally, in our news, it took some patience, a bit of flexibility, and a lot of planning. But on November 7th, finally, thousands of runners finally got their day on the 36th LA Marathon. We have Kenyan John Courier being the men's winner of Sunday's marathon, 2 years after being passed in the final 200 yards, while Natasha Cochran of Wales was the women's winner. Alan and Eva Basalyahe were at the scene.
John Creer from Kenya
and Natasha Cockrem of Wales are this year's men's and women's LA Marathon champions.
With finishing times of 2:12.48 and 2:33.17 respectively, we spoke with John and Natasha, who incidentally each records their very first marathon victories here in the City of Angels.
I've trained for this marathon for 5 months. That's 3 months without speed work and then 2 months for speed work. I'm not tired. I'm feeling like running another 10K. Yeah. All marathons I've run, they all defeated me in the finishing line. So I like this one because they know today there was no one to defeat me in the line. Looking forward to come and win again so that my brother win this race 2 times. So when I come back next year and win, will be winning. I will have win 2 times. My hometown in India is so different. My hometown is so hilly and yes, flat. Los Angeles people are friendly. Anyone is your friend. Yeah.
A little bit disappointed with the time, but I couldn't expect too much because it's only 5 weeks post London and the course is quite hilly, so it's not a fast course. So yeah, I can't complain. It's not a bad time. I think that would have been a PB had it been a flat course. So I think I've been more prepared for the hills next time. I wasn't expecting it to be as hilly, so yeah, definitely it's a great race. I'd love to come back and experience it all again. It is a lot of sacrifice, but I think anyone can do it. I mean, it's only really been the last 2-3 years that I've had this breakthrough to become an elite runner. So yeah, I think if you want to do it, you can definitely do it. You just got to put your mind to it and make those sacrifices, put the work in, and you can achieve what you want to achieve. There's always times where you go through rough patches for weeks, sometimes even months. So at that point, sometimes you don't want to go out the door, but you just have to. You have to keep pushing through, get it done. I haven't really got any plans, like set plans, but hopefully another marathon in another couple of months. And then next year is a big year, what with Commonwealths, Europeans and Worlds. So have to decide what I'm going to do, and yeah, hopefully I'll have all 3 options. But keeping focused now, because I think the next year and next 2 years is so important with what Paris 2024. It's actually not that far away. So yeah, focus now. I've already gone for a mile jog, and I think maybe tonight I'll do a bit of aqua jogging just to keep the legs moving and recover so I can get straight back out there training.
Stadium to the Stars are the words that describes this year's Los Angeles Marathon presented by ASICS, now on its 36th year, as more than 13,000 runners start from Dodger Stadium to run the 26.2 miles to finish at Century Park on Avenue of the Stars. Runners pass through well-known places and landmarks like Rodeo Drive, Hollywood Walk of Fame, and Little Tokyo.
Completing 26.2 miles is no small feat. Eva, why didn't you run?
Because I have small feet.
Well, being small-footed is no reason not to try to challenge oneself.
Because all you need to cross the finish line is to make sure your determination is big.
In Los Angeles, California, Eva and Alan, Eagle News, we live in interesting times.
I also have small feet.
Fun. Well, I have small feet for my height. And that's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I am CJ Hero. See you back on Monday.
And at the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. We'll see you back on Monday. I'm Alma Angeles, and
we live in
interesting times.
Napapansin ba ninyo lumiliwanag ang mundo pag magkasama tayo? Life is so much sweeter, everything feels better pag tayong lahat ay together. Let's have fun together, let's play together, kumain, magluto, matuto together, tawanan together, hawak kamay together, we'll be there for each other, we're stronger together. Kaya tara na Filipino, let's get together, let's all come alive. Kaya 25. Senate 25. Let's stay together, let's sing together, let's all work together, mag-travel together, let's shop together, mangarap together. We can fly higher when we are together. Kaya tara na Filipino, let's get together, let's all come alive. Kaya tara na Filipino, let's get together. Senate 25. Panalo tayo pag together, walang talo pag together, balitaan together, love each other, magsikap together, magsikap together. Kaya tara na Filipino, let's get together, let's all come alive. Kaya tara na Filipino, let's get together. Senate 25. Senate 25. Senate 25. Let's get together. Senate 25.
This is Net 25, a commercial UHF television station owned and operated by the Eagle Broadcasting Corporation, transmitting on a 50 kilowatt output with NTC permit number BSD-0184-2020-0452, authorizing this station to operate until July 12, 2023. Net 25 studios and transmitter are located at number 25 Central Avenue, New Era, Quezon City. Net 25 is headed by the following personnel, duly licensed by the Professional Regulation Commission and the National Telecommunications Commission. Professional Electronics Engineer Armando C. Bonifacio Jr., PECE 838. Professional Electronics Engineer Bernard N. Pangulayan, PECE 869. Professional Electronics Engineer Randy A. Velasco, PECE 555. Electronics Engineer Erickson D. Ventura, ECE 44844. Electronics Engineer Arturo F. Pascua Jr., ECE 43934. Electronics Engineer Adrian V. Augusto, ECE 59367. With first-class radio telephone operators, Enrico V. Erbite, 94-1RTG-7204. Gracious V. Pascual, 92-3PNCR-352. Modesto V. De Vera, 96-1PNCR-18494. Fretz C. Moliena, 93-1PVI-6551. This is Net 25. Now signing off. Ladies and gentlemen, the Philippine National Anthem.
Bayang magiliw, perlas ng silanganan, alam ng puso, sa titik mo'y